November 2024. Cascade General Hospital, Seattle. 4th floor, post-surgical trauma wing. The rain didn't fall so much as assault the windows, sheets of Pacific water driven sideways by wind that howled through the gap between buildings. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed their eternal drone, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even the living look half dead. Reese Gallagher sat at the nurse's station, spine curved forward, shoulders rolled inward like she was trying to occupy less space than her body required. 27 years old, but the reflection in the dark monitor showed someone older, worn down by nights that bled into mornings and debts that never stopped growing. Her light brown hair hung in a loose knot that had given up pretending to be professional 6 hours into her shift. The blue glow from the computer screen reflected in eyes that didn't blink often enough, that watched everything and revealed nothing. Brittany Cole, 24 and fresh from nursing school, sat 3 feet away scrolling TikTok with the sound off, occasionally glancing at Reese like she was examining something vaguely disappointing. The younger woman popped her gum, a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet corridor. I asked what she did over the weekend, and she said paying debts. Brittany didn't bother lowering her voice. Who pays debts for 48 hours straight? I swear she's a robot. No life, no personality, just scanning charts and changing IV bags like some kind of medical android. Derek Martinez, the male nurse covering the West Wing, didn't look up from his tablet. Long as she knows which end of a catheter goes where, I don't really care if she stares at walls all day. The words washed over Reese without leaving marks. She'd heard worse, been called worse. The opinions of people who'd never had to pack a sucking chest wound under mortar fire didn't register on the scale of things that mattered. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, updating patient charts with the efficiency of someone who'd learned long ago that feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford. Room 401. Post-op appendectomy. Stable. Pain managed at 6 out of 10. Room 402. Gunshot wound to left shoulder. Stable but guarded. Vitals within acceptable parameters. Room 403. Hip replacement recovery. Elderly female. Complaining about food quality, which meant she was healing fine. Dr. Richard Hayes emerged from the stairwell, white coat wrinkled, stethoscope hanging around his neck like a badge of authority he'd earned through exhaustion and ego. The trauma surgery chief had just finished a 6-hour vascular repair on a construction worker who'd met the wrong end of a nail gun, and he moved with that particular stiffness of someone running on caffeine and pride. He dropped a stack of charts on the desk without acknowledging Reese directly. These need signatures before shift change. Hayes addressed the air somewhere above Reese's head. And someone needs to check on the shoulder GSW in 402. Family keeps calling, asking questions. Monroe, you handle it. Just keep it simple. Your communication skills aren't exactly your strong suit. Reese took the charts without comment, without expression, already standing before Hayes finished speaking. She moved down the corridor with footsteps that made no sound, a habit so ingrained she no longer remembered learning it. Afghanistan had taught her that noise got you killed, and some lessons carved themselves too deep to ever fade. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a dull pulse against her thigh. She didn't need to look to know what it was. The texts always came between 11 and midnight, always from numbers that changed but delivered the same message wrapped in different threats. Still, habit made her pull it out, glance at the screen, while her face stayed blank as unmarked paper. Weston, 22 years old, her baby brother, though he hadn't been a baby in a long time. The message sat there like a live grenade. Sis, they gave me 48 more hours. Need $180,000? Or JB Collection starts taking fingers. They showed me photos of the last guy. Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you're doing everything you can, but they're serious this time. Reese's hand didn't shake. That was the thing people never understood about real fear, real pressure. It didn't make you tremble. It made you cold. It made you still. It turned your blood to something thicker than water, something that moved through your veins with the slow certainty of concrete setting. She deleted the message. typed back with thumbs that had set IVs in moving vehicles and sutured wounds in 100-degree heat. "I'll handle it." 3 words, no emotion, no promise she could keep, but making it anyway, because that's what you did for family. That's what you did for the people whose bad decisions became your emergency, whose weakness became your burden to carry. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. Room 402. The shoulder, GSW. Reese had known it wasn't a robbery the moment she'd seen the wound during intake. 9mm, close range, entry point consistent with execution-style positioning. The police report said random mugging gone wrong. But Reese had seen enough combat casualties to know the difference between chaos and intent. Someone had meant to kill the woman in that bed. They'd just failed at it. The door opened silently under her touch. Inside, the lights were dimmed to half power, casting everything in shades of gray. Natalia Kane lay propped against pillows, IV line running into her left arm, shoulder wrapped in bandages that showed a small seep of red where the wound still wept. 24 years old, dark hair spilled across the pillow, eyes closed, but her body held tension like a wire pulled taut. Even in sleep, she looked ready to fight. Reese checked the IV drip rate, examined the bandage without disturbing it, noted the vitals on the bedside monitor. Heart rate slightly elevated at 78, blood pressure stable, temperature normal. The wound was healing clean, no signs of infection, though the woman had lost enough blood during surgery to require 2 units of O positive. Those eyes opened, gray, sharp, assessing. They tracked Reese's movements with the alertness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "You're the quiet one." Natalia's voice came out rough, abraded by whatever they'd shoved down her throat during intubation. "The other nurses talk like I'm not here." "You just do your job." Reese adjusted the IV without looking at her patient's face. Talking takes energy. Healing requires energy. Better to conserve it. Practical. Natalia shifted slightly, winced, settled back. "My brother would like you. He appreciates people who don't waste words." Reese made a notation on the chart, still not meeting those gray eyes. "Your brother should appreciate you being alive." Muggings don't usually involve execution-style positioning. The silence that followed had weight. Natalia studied Reese with new interest, head tilted despite the pain it clearly caused. "You military?" "Was." "Combat?" "The kind that counts." Natalia almost smiled, though it looked like the expression hurt. "Yeah, my brother would definitely like you." Reese closed the chart, finally met that gray stare with her own. "Your shoulder will heal. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Scar tissue will be minimal if you do the physical therapy. But whoever put that bullet in you knew what they were doing. They'll try again. Should I be scared?" Reese moved toward the door, hand on the frame. "Fear is just information. What you do with it determines whether you survive." She left before Natalia could respond, pulling the door closed with the same silence she'd used to open it. The corridor stretched ahead, empty except for the eternal hum of machinery keeping people alive, keeping systems running, keeping the world turning one monitored heartbeat at a time. Room 415 waited at the far end. Reese could hear the television through the door before she opened it, some late-night cartoon playing at low volume. Inside, Beckett sat propped up in bed, 8 years old and bald from chemotherapy, skin translucent pale in a way that made her chest hurt if she let herself feel it. He wasn't watching the screen. His eyes tracked the rain against the window, following individual drops as they raced downward. "Ghost lady." He said it without turning, without surprise, like he'd known she was there before the door opened. "You walk so quiet. That's why you're like a ghost." Reese moved to check his chart, scanning the latest blood work results. Platelet count still low but stable. White cells recovering slowly from the last round of chemo. The leukemia was responding to treatment, but the war being fought inside this child's marrow was far from won. "Ghosts aren't real, Beckett, just stories." "But you're sad like ghosts in stories." He looked at her then, those 2 old eyes in that too young face. "Mom says ghosts are people who died but forgot to leave. Are you like that?" The question landed with more force than any mortar round. Reese stood very still, the chart gripped in hands that had held dying men, that had performed procedures in the back of vehicles racing through hostile territory, that had learned to stay steady when everything else fell apart. Sometimes. The word came out quieter than she'd intended. Sometimes people survive things they shouldn't, and after that, they're never quite all the way back. Beckett nodded like this made perfect sense, like 8-year-olds understood existential displacement better than adults who'd never faced it. I like rain. It makes everything clean, washes away the bad stuff. Reese pulled the blanket higher, tucking it around thin shoulders with a gentleness that would have surprised her colleagues. Rain hides things too. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it just delays dealing with what's underneath. Are you dealing with what's underneath? Working on it. Beckett reached out, small hand catching her wrist before she could step back. Ghost ladies shouldn't be sad forever. Even in stories, ghosts find peace eventually. Maybe. Reese didn't pull away, let the contact happen, let herself feel the fragile warmth of this child's touch. But some ghosts have work to finish first. She left him watching the rain, the television still playing to an audience of one, and moved back into the corridor. The clock above the nurse's station read 11:23. 7 more hours until shift change. 7 more hours of monitoring vitals and changing dressings and pretending she was someone who'd successfully buried Sergeant Reese Gallagher under layers of civilian normalcy. Thunder rolled across the city, low and distant but building. Reese's shoulders didn't tense. She didn't flinch. The sound that made everyone else on the floor look up barely registered on her radar because thunder wasn't mortar fire, wasn't the particular crack of rounds passing close enough to feel the displacement, wasn't anything worth reacting to. But then came another sound, different, wrong. Clack, slide, snap. The unmistakable mechanical action of a rifle bolt being drawn back, chambering a round, released to feed ammunition from magazine to firing chamber. That sound existed in a category separate from civilian life, belonged to a world most people only saw in movies, lived in the muscle memory of anyone who'd carried weapons professionally. Reese stopped moving. The trash bag she'd been carrying to the disposal room hung forgotten in her left hand. Her spine straightened by degrees, shoulders rolling back, chin dropping slightly, weight shifting to the balls of her feet. The transformation happened in heartbeats, invisible to anyone not trained to see it. The hunched nurse disappeared. What remained was something harder, something that had survived an ambush in Kandahar province by staying absolutely still for 16 hours while hostiles walked past her position. The elevator chime rang, bell clear and innocuous. Ding! Reese didn't breathe. She moved backward 3 steps, fluid and silent, slipping into the utility room with her back to the shelving units. The door stayed open a crack, just wide enough for one eye to see the corridor, just narrow enough to remain invisible from the elevator alcove. The doors slid open with their usual pneumatic wheeze. 5 men stepped out. The leader moved first, 6'3", maybe 6'4", shoulders that filled the width of a doorframe. Wearing a long black coat soaked through from the rain outside, his face looked like it had been carved from something harder than flesh, all angles and planes, with a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw in a white line that spoke of old violence. He scanned the corridor with eyes that missed nothing, that measured distances and calculated angles with the automatic precision of someone who'd learned to clear rooms before he could legally drink. Reese assessed him in the 3 seconds it took him to fully emerge. Military bearing, probably Marine Corps, given the way he held his center of gravity. Age, 45, maybe 50. Scar tissue on the knuckles, visible even from 15 feet. Handgun under the coat, left side, probably a Sig Sauer given the slight bulge. Combat knife on the right hip. This wasn't someone playing soldier, this was the real thing. 4 more men followed. They moved in formation without being obvious about it, spacing themselves with the practiced ease of a team that had worked together long enough to operate on instinct. 2 carried AR-15 platform rifles, shortened barrels for close quarters, holographic sights, fingers indexed along the receivers with the discipline of professional shooters. The weapons were held low but ready, not brandished but available, positioned for immediate deployment. The third man carried a duffel bag that sagged with weight. Explosives or additional weapons, maybe both. His eyes swept the corridor in overlapping sectors with the second rifleman, creating interlocking fields of observation. The fourth had flex cuffs hanging from his belt. Lots of them. Enough to secure 24 people. Reese's mind shifted into combat mode, running calculations with the cold efficiency she'd learned when staying calm meant staying alive. 5 hostiles. 4 confirmed weapons, likely more concealed. Professional military background. Current contractor work based on the coordination and equipment quality. They weren't here for drugs or random violence. This was a planned operation with a specific objective. Her gaze tracked to room 402. Natalia Kane. The execution-style GSW. The brother who appreciated people who didn't waste words. The kind of life that drew armed professionals to a hospital at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. The environmental assessment ran parallel. 4th floor, post-surgical trauma wing. 40 meters of corridor. Nurses station in the center. Patient rooms flanking both sides, 12 total currently occupied. Medical oxygen storage at the western terminus. Red hazard signage warning about fire risk. Electrical breaker room beside the elevator. 3 stairwells. A near the elevator, B at the western end, C tucked behind the storage area where only staff who'd worked here for years knew to look. Current resources. 0 weapons, phone at the nurse's station not in her possession, no backup, no way to alert security without being seen. Skills. Ranger qualified combat medic, 3 rotations in theater, expert marksman rating, advanced trauma care, survival and evasion training. Element of surprise. These men had no idea she existed as anything except potential collateral. The odds of surviving a direct confrontation were effectively 0. 5 trained operators with superior firepower against 1 unarmed woman made for the kind of mathematics that didn't require a calculator. But Reese hadn't survived Kandahar by choosing direct confrontation. She'd survived by becoming invisible, by understanding that victory wasn't always about winning the fight in front of you. Sometimes, it was about avoiding the fight entirely while accomplishing the objective through other means. The leader raised his hand, 4 fingers extended, then pointed. Silent communication, military hand signals. The team split with practiced efficiency. 1 rifleman moved towards stairwell A, taking up position to control that exit. Another headed west towards stairwell B. The man with the duffel held position at the elevator, blocking that route. The leader and remaining riflemen advanced toward the nurse's station, where Brittany and Derek sat oblivious, where Ashley scrolled through her phone without comprehension that the world was about to fracture. Reese needed to know their objective before she could formulate any plan. Needed to understand what they wanted, who they were hunting, what timeline they were operating under. Needed information before action, because blind movement got people killed. She glanced down at her wrinkled scrubs, her scuffed sneakers, her hands that showed no signs of the calluses that had once defined them. She looked exactly like what she'd worked so hard to become. Invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. A rabbit in a world of wolves. Perfect. The decision crystallized with the same cold clarity she'd felt in that overturned vehicle in Afghanistan, trapped under bodies while enemy fighters searched for survivors. Hide and potentially survive, or act and potentially save others. The math was simple. The cost was everything. Reese let the trash bag drop silently, rolled her shoulders forward again, hunched her spine, widened her eyes. Stepped into the corridor with trembling hands raised, voice pitched high and breaking. "Please don't shoot!" The words came out cracked, terrified, everything she wasn't and had learned to perform. "I'm just a nurse. I was taking out trash. Please, I have a child at home. Please don't hurt me." Every eye swung toward her. The leader's gaze swept her head to toe in assessment lasting maybe 2 seconds. He saw exactly what she wanted him to see. A panicked civilian, no threat, no value except as a potential hostage. His lip curled slightly, dismissive, already discounting her as irrelevant. "Bring her with the others." His voice carried the flat affect of someone giving routine orders, no emotion, no interest. She might be useful. The rifleman closest to her moved forward, grabbed her upper arm with unnecessary force, dragged her toward the nurse's station. Reese let herself stumble, let her feet scrape the floor, let tears well in her eyes and spill over. Every physical cue screamed helpless victim, but inside her head, Sergeant Gallagher was counting steps. 23 from utility room to nurse's station, 15 meters to oxygen storage, 10 paces to the electrical breaker. The rifleman holding her had the rifle in his right hand, Glock on his left hip, K-bar knife sheathed at the small of his back under his jacket. He favored his right leg slightly, old injury probably, weak point if it came to close combat. His breathing was steady but shallow, adrenaline controlled but present. She cataloged everything, stored it, waited. The leader had reached the nurse's station. Brittany looked up from her phone, confusion crossing her face before it transformed into something else. Derek froze, tablet gripped in both hands like it might somehow protect him. Nobody moves. The leader's voice cut through the ambient noise of machines and monitors. Hands where I can see them. No alarms, no phones. Anyone who tries to be a hero becomes a casualty. Clear? Brittany made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Derek slowly raised his hands, tablet clattering to the desk. Get down, hands behind your head, now. They didn't move fast enough. The leader drew his weapon in one smooth motion, fired a single round into the ceiling. The blast in the enclosed corridor hit like a physical force, plaster exploding in a white cloud, the sharp crack followed by ringing silence that felt like pressure against eardrums. Brittany screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed off walls and medical equipment. Derek dropped to his knees, hands lacing behind his head, whole body shaking. The next person who screams gets the round in their kneecap. The leader's voice stayed level, almost bored. I won't say it 3 times. Down, hands, now. This time they complied. Brittany collapsed face first on the floor, tears streaming. Derek went prone beside her, breathing in ragged gasps. Reese let herself be thrown down with them, let the rifleman shove her hard enough that she hit the ground with genuine impact. But her eyes stayed open, tracking everything, recording details with the clinical precision of someone who'd learned that survival depended on seeing what others missed. The leader gestured to his remaining team member. Room to room, every patient out here. Can't walk, drag them. Anyone fights, shoot the leg. Doors began opening. Patients pulled from beds, some ambulatory, some requiring assistance, most confused and frightened. An elderly woman in a wheelchair, a middle-aged man on crutches, a young woman clutching her abdomen where staples held her surgical incision closed. They were herded into the corridor, forced down to the ground, flex cuffs secured around wrists. Reese watched the count climb. 8, 10, 14. She knew there were 19 patients on this floor tonight, knew that room 402 held Natalia Kane, knew that room 415 held Beckett, 8 years old, bald from chemo, too weak to run even if given the chance. The door to 415 opened. The rifleman emerged, pulling Beckett by his thin arm, the boy's feet dragging, crying for his mother in a voice that barely carried. Reese felt something crack in her chest, something she'd kept locked down for 5 years, something that Kandahar had broken and she'd never properly healed. Her hands clenched into fists before she forced them open, forced her breathing to stay ragged and panicked, forced herself to remain the terrified nurse, and not the ranger who wanted very badly to kill everyone in this corridor. Not yet. Intelligence first, then action. The leader walked past the growing cluster of hostages, checking faces, dismissing most. He stopped at room 402. The door opened. Natalia Kane lay in her bed, too weak from blood loss to do more than prop herself on one elbow. But her gray eyes held no fear, only cold assessment and something that looked almost like recognition. Found you. The leader smiled, expression holding no warmth. Natalia Kane, the princess in her tower. Natalia's voice came out steady despite her condition. You're making a mistake. My brother will kill every one of you. Your brother? The leader moved closer, grabbed a fistful of her hair, hauled her upright despite the wound in her shoulder. Fresh blood bloomed through the bandages. Natalia didn't scream. Her jaw clenched, tendons standing out in her neck, but she made no sound. Your brother. The leader repeated it like tasting something bitter. Let me tell you about your brother, princess. 6 months ago, Vincent Kane put 2 rounds in my partner's head, left him bleeding out in a Tacoma parking garage. My partner was a Purple Heart recipient, Iraq veteran, served his country with honor. Your brother executed him like a dog. Natalia's face stayed hard. Your partner was selling military-grade weapons to domestic terrorists. He got what? The leader backhanded her, movement sharp and economical. Natalia's head snapped sideways, blood trickling from her split lip. He dragged her from the bed, pulled her into the corridor, threw her down with the other hostages. Reese watched, calculated. The name Vincent Kane rattled around her memory, connected to newspaper articles she'd skinned, rumors among people who paid attention to Seattle's underground economy. Security contractor. Former military, probably special operations given the reputation. Ran a firm that operated in legal gray areas, protecting clients who needed protection from things the police couldn't or wouldn't handle. The kind of man who'd come for his sister. The kind of man who'd walk into hell alone if that's what it required. Phone. The leader snapped his fingers at the rifleman. The man searched Natalia's hospital gown, found an iPhone in the pocket, handed it over. The leader scrolled, found a contact, dialed, put it on speaker. It rang 3 times. Then a voice emerged, male, controlled, with the particular coldness of someone who'd seen violence and learned to wield it with precision. If my sister has a scratch on her, I will peel every one of you alive. Slowly. Over days. You'll beg for death before I'm done. The leader actually laughed. Vincent Kane, the legend. I've heard so much about you. Clayton Holt, former Force Recon Marine. The voice on the phone stayed level, but something beneath it shifted, sharpened. You're a dead man, Clayton. You just don't know it yet. Maybe. Holt's smile widened. But right now, I have your sister. I have 24 hostages. I have all the time in the world. You have 30 minutes to get to Cascade General Hospital, 4th floor, alone and unarmed. Or I start mailing pieces of Natalia back to you. Your choice. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 30 minutes. The line went dead. Holt ended the call, tossed the phone aside, looked at his team. Clock started. Positions. The riflemen moved to their assigned locations. Stairwell A covered. Stairwell B secured. Elevator held. The net was drawn tight. Escape routes blocked. 24 hostages on the floor, with hands behind heads or secured with flex cuffs. Reese lay among them, face down, breathing controlled, mind racing through scenarios and probabilities. 30 minutes. 1,800 seconds. Vincent Kane was coming, which meant this situation would escalate from hostage crisis to active combat. Holt wanted Kane, probably wanted him to watch Natalia die before killing him too. Revenge for a dead partner, played out with the calculated brutality of someone who'd learned violence as a profession and never learned to put it down. The hostages were props, collateral, leverage to ensure Kane came alone and unarmed. After that, they were witnesses who couldn't be allowed to testify, which meant everyone in this corridor was already dead unless something changed the equation. Reese turned her head slightly, just enough to see Brittany beside her. The younger woman's face was pressed to the floor, mascara running in black streaks, body shaking with suppressed sobs. Reese shifted closer, voice barely a whisper. Listen to me. When I say run, you run. Don't ask questions, don't look back. Straight to the storage area at the west end. Behind the oxygen tanks, there's a door marked maintenance. Stairwell C. Down to 3rd floor. Find somewhere to hide. Do not call police until I tell you. Understand? Brittany's eyes found hers, wide and terrified, and seeing something in Reese's face that didn't match the scared nurse act. Who are you? Someone who survived worse than this. Reese's voice stayed low, steady. Trust me or don't, but when the moment comes, you'll have one chance. Take it or die here. She moved her attention to Derek on the other side, repeated the instructions in a whisper that barely disturbed the air, saw his hands stop shaking quite so badly, saw some of the panic fade as hope replaced it. Around them, other hostages lay in various states of fear. The elderly woman in the wheelchair sat rigid, lips moving in silent prayer. The man on crutches had given up trying to stay upright, lay awkwardly on his side. Beckett had curled into a ball, still crying quietly, calling for his mother in a voice that broke something in Reese every time she heard it. She couldn't save everyone. The mathematics were brutal and clear. 5 armed professionals against 1 unarmed woman with ranger training meant the direct approach ended in failure. But she could create chaos, could use the environment as a weapon, could exploit the fact that Holt and his team were focused on Vincent Kane's arrival and not on the supposedly helpless hostages at their feet. 23 minutes had passed. 7 minutes remained. Reese used them to observe, to plan, to prepare for the moment when observation would shift to action. Holt paced the corridor, checking his watch, weapon held ready but not quite aimed. His team stayed in position, professional and disciplined. This wasn't their first operation. Probably wasn't their first hostage situation. They knew what they were doing, which made them dangerous, but also potentially predictable. Predictable meant exploitable. The elevator chimed again. Ding! Every weapon in the corridor swung toward that sound. Holt raised a hand, signaling his team to hold fire. The doors opened. A man stepped out, hands raised, blood soaking through his shirt from a shoulder wound. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, dressed in tactical pants and a black shirt that clung to muscled arms. His face was set in hard lines, pain visible but controlled, eyes scanning the corridor with the same professional assessment Holt had used. The rifleman at the elevator moved behind him, pressed a gun barrel to the base of his skull. "Boss," the rifleman called to Holt. "Caught this one trying to sneak up the service stairs. He was armed. Disarmed now." Holt approached, studying the injured man. "Who are you?" "Marco Benedetti." The man's voice came through gritted teeth. "Donovan Kane's head of security. My boss is on his way." "A bodyguard?" Holt circled him like a predator examining wounded prey. "Your boss sent you ahead to scout? Or did you decide to play hero on your own?" Marco didn't answer. His eyes swept the hostages, counting them, assessing their condition, looking for his principal sister. Found Natalia. Held her gaze for a moment, some communication passing between them that Reese couldn't interpret. "Tie him up. Put him with the others." Holt gestured dismissively. "He's bait like the rest." The rifleman forced Marco to his knees, secured his hands behind his back with flex cuffs, pushed him down to the floor. Fresh blood spread across the tile from his shoulder wound, mixing with the water still dripping from his clothes. Reese noted it, noted the wound placement, the fact that Marco had allowed himself to be caught, the way he'd deliberately announced himself and drawn attention. This was planned, coordinated. Marco was a distraction, which meant the real threat was arriving through a different vector. The lights went out. Complete darkness, sudden and absolute. The emergency lighting should have kicked in within 3 seconds but didn't, which meant someone had cut power to the entire floor, not just the main circuits. Chaos erupted. Hostages screamed. Holt shouted orders. Footsteps pounded in multiple directions. A gunshot cracked somewhere near stairwell B. Single shot, suppressed but still audible, followed by the heavy thump of a body hitting the floor. Reese moved. She rolled away from the cluster of hostages, low and fast, heading for the medical supply room. Her eyes had adjusted to darkness faster than most, years of night operations creating muscle memory that needed no conscious thought. She could see shapes, movement, enough to navigate. Another shot, another body dropping. Someone cut the power. Holt's voice boomed in the darkness, trying to regain control of the situation. "Hold your positions. No one moves." But it was too late for that. The battlefield had shifted. The advantage had changed hands. Whoever had come for Natalia Kane was here, and they were hunting. Reese reached the supply room, slipped inside, found the cabinet she needed by touch alone. Ketamine vials, syringes, scalpels. She loaded a syringe with enough sedative to drop a man twice her size, pocketed 2 scalpels, grabbed a second loaded syringe for backup. Not much, but more than nothing. She moved back to the doorway, pressed against the wall, controlling her breathing the way she'd been trained. Slow inhales through the nose, measured exhales through slightly parted lips. Heart rate steady, muscles ready. The ghost that Beckett had named was fully present now, and she'd learned in Kandahar how ghosts moved through the dark. The emergency lighting still hadn't activated. Someone was keeping it suppressed, maintaining the darkness, using it as cover. Professional work. Military-grade tactical thinking. Reese waited, watched, listened. Footsteps approached her position, heavy boots, running gait. One of Holt's riflemen, panicked, separated from his team. He passed within 3 feet of her hiding spot, weapon raised, searching for targets he couldn't see. Reese moved. 3 steps, silent as thought, coming up behind him. Left hand clamped over his mouth, right hand driving the syringe into his carotid, depressing the plunger, feeling the ketamine flood his system. He struggled for maybe 5 seconds before his muscles stopped obeying commands, before consciousness fled and he collapsed against her. She lowered him quietly to the floor, took his Glock 19 from the hip holster, checked the magazine by feel. 15 rounds plus 1 chambered. She'd worked with Glocks in training, knew the trigger pull, the recoil pattern, the balance. Not her preferred weapon, but it would serve. A hand grabbed her from behind, blade pressed to her throat with professional precision. Cool steel against her carotid, pressure just short of breaking skin. Wrong move ends you. The voice was male, controlled, barely above a whisper. Reese didn't struggle, didn't tense, stayed absolutely still and spoke with the same controlled calm. "You're not Holtz, you're Kane, former Delta Force. I can tell by your breathing pattern and blade placement. Carotid hold with intent to intimidate, not execute." The pressure on the blade eased fractionally. "Who are you?" Before Reese could answer, she saw movement in her peripheral vision, one of Holt's men circling around, rifle raising to target the man holding her. The angle was wrong, visibility poor, but in another 2 seconds he'd have position, and the man behind her would die before he knew the threat existed. Reese threw the scalpel. It wasn't a perfect throw. Dim lighting, moving target, awkward angle, but her hand remembered trajectories the way some people remembered phone numbers. Calculated arc and velocity and release point through pure muscle memory developed over thousands of repetitions. The scalpel hit the rifleman's forearm as he raised his weapon, buried itself in the flexor muscles, made him drop the rifle with a strangled curse that died in his throat as he reached for the blade. The man behind Reese spun, saw the threat, saw the neutralization, looked back at her with eyes she couldn't see but could feel assessing, reevaluating, calculating. He released her, stepped back. "Explain, fast." Reese turned to face him, could barely make out his silhouette in the darkness, but knew she'd been right. Donovan Kane stood in front of her, 6 feet of controlled lethality, moving like someone who'd learned warfare at the highest levels and never forgotten the lessons. Sergeant Reese Gallagher, 75th Rangers, combat medic, 3 rotations Afghanistan. Ambush survivor, Kandahar Province, March 2019. My unit got hit, 12 went in, 1 came out. The words emerged flat, factual, stripped of emotion because emotion didn't help anything. I've been hiding in civilian life for 5 years. Tonight, hiding ended. Kane studied her for a long moment. How many in your unit survived? 1. The answer hung between them, heavy with everything it didn't say. Kane's posture shifted slightly, recognition of shared experience, understanding that came from walking similar paths through similar hells. A sound reached them, Holt's voice, distant but growing closer, calling for his scattered team to regroup. "Come with me." Kane gestured toward the utility room. "We need to talk, fast." They moved together through the darkness, 2 predators operating in their natural element while everyone else stumbled blind. The utility room door closed behind them with barely a whisper. Kane pulled a small tactical light from his belt, shielded it with his palm to create just enough glow to see each other's faces without broadcasting their position. He looked exactly like his sister. Same gray eyes, same hard set to his jaw, same expression that said he'd seen the worst humanity offered and learned to meet it without flinching. "What do you know?" Kane's voice stayed low, controlled. Reese gave it to him in the shorthand of people who understood tactical situations. 5 hostiles led by Clayton Holt, former Force Recon Marine. 4 confirmed weapons, likely more concealed. 24 hostages including your sister. Holt wants you. This is revenge for his partner, the one you killed 6 months ago in Tacoma. He's going to make you watch Natalia die, then kill you. Hostages are leverage now, witnesses to eliminate after. Kane absorbed it without visible reaction. His plan? Keep everyone contained until you arrive, execute you both, clean up the witnesses. Probably has an exit strategy that involves fire or explosion to destroy evidence. Reese paused, then continued. Your man Marco let himself get caught. Deliberate distraction. You cut the power, took out 2 guards before Holt regrouped. Professional work. You threw that scalpel. Kane's eyes stayed on her face. 20 feet in near darkness, moving target. That's not nurse training. Reese met his gaze without wavering. Ranger training. Some skills don't fade. They just wait for situations that require them. Kane pulled a small tablet from his tactical vest, activated it, showed her a schematic. I have blueprints. 3 stairwells, A, B, C. Holt has A and B covered. What about C? Hidden behind the storage area, Reese pointed. Only staff who've been here a while know it exists. Maintenance access, rarely used. I can evacuate hostages in groups using C while you keep Holt's attention. My sister stays until everyone else is out? Has to. Reese held his stare. She's the leverage keeping you in play. The moment Holt realizes hostages are disappearing, he'll panic. Might execute her to make a point. But if we extract everyone else first, we change the equation. No witnesses left to control. No leverage except Natalia. That's when we take her and Marco simultaneously. Kane's hands clenched. If Natalia dies because of this plan, I'll kill you myself. Reese didn't flinch. If she dies, you won't need to. I don't plan on surviving that scenario. Something shifted in Kane's expression. Not softness, nothing so simple. Recognition, perhaps. Respect for someone who understood that some things mattered more than survival. You lead the evacuation, I handled the guards. When everyone's out except Natalia and Marco, we hit Holt together. Agreed? Agreed. Kane extended his hand. Reese took it. The grip was firm, brief, the kind of handshake that sealed contracts between people who understood that words were cheaper than actions. They moved back to the corridor, separating to their assigned tasks, 2 operators in a darkness that had become their ally instead of their enemy. Reese crawled back to the hostages, found Brittany and Derek huddled where she'd left them. First group, 7 who can walk unassisted. You lead them to stairwell C, exactly like I told you. Down to 3rd floor. Hide. Wait. Brittany grabbed Reese's wrist. Who are you really? Someone who saves people. Now move. 7 people rose from the floor in near silence, bodies bent low, following Derek through the darkness toward the storage area. Reese counted them as they moved. The middle-aged man with crutches, 2 young women with minor wounds, 4 other recovering patients who could walk without assistance. Their footsteps made almost no sound against the tile, fear transforming them into shadows that slipped past oxygen storage tanks and medical equipment racks. Holt's voice echoed from somewhere near the nurses' station, calling for his remaining team to report positions. He hadn't noticed yet. The darkness worked for them, concealing the slow hemorrhage of his leverage as hostages vanished into stairwell C. Reese stayed low, crawling back through the cluster of remaining civilians. 17 still needed extraction. The elderly woman in the wheelchair presented the biggest challenge, her frame too fragile to move quickly, her terror too complete to process instructions easily. Beside her, a male patient too weak from surgery to stand without support. Both required assistance, which meant slower movement, higher risk of detection. She reached the wheelchair, put her mouth close to the woman's ear. "I'm getting you out. Stay quiet. Trust me." The woman's hands gripped the armrests with arthritic fingers, knuckles white even in the dim emergency lighting that had finally flickered to partial life. Reese could see her face now, mapped with wrinkles and wet with tears, lips moving in prayer that made no sound. Brittany materialized beside them, having returned from delivering the first group. Her mascara-streaked face showed something different now. Not just fear, but determination, born from having successfully completed one impossible task and discovering she could survive it. "I'll push the chair." Brittany's whisper came steadier than before. "You guide the weak ones." Reese nodded, moved to the male patient who'd been struggling to stay upright. Got him under one arm, steadied his weight against her shoulder, gestured to 4 more who needed minimal assistance, indicated they should follow. The procession moved with agonizing slowness. Every squeak of the wheelchair threatened exposure. Every ragged breath from the weak patient sounded like a shout in the relative quiet. They passed within 10 feet of where Holt stood, coordinating with his remaining riflemen, close enough that Reese could hear their low conversation about perimeter security and Kane's expected arrival time. The storage area loomed ahead. Oxygen tanks lined the wall, red hazard warnings bright against white paint. Beyond them, barely visible unless you knew to look, the door marked "Maintenance Access Only." Brittany reached it first, eased it open, began maneuvering the wheelchair through the narrow opening. A medication bottle rolled across the floor somewhere behind them. Not loud, just a soft rattle of plastic against tile, but in the tension-charged silence, it carried like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Reese felt her lungs lock, heart rate spiking despite years of training that preached calm under pressure. The weak patient beside her made a strangled sound, terror overwhelming his ability to remain quiet. Reese coughed, hard, loud, deliberate. The kind of wet hack that suggested illness rather than concealment. She doubled over with it, letting the sound echo through the corridor, masking the medication bottle's betrayal and the weak patient's gasp. Holt's flashlight beams swept in their direction. Reese stayed bent, still coughing, one hand covering her mouth. The beam touched the edge of the wheelchair as it disappeared through the stairwell door, but Brittany had already pulled it completely through, already closed the door to nothing more than a hairline crack. The light moved away. Holt's attention returned to his tactical radio, calling for status updates from team members who would never respond. Reese straightened slowly, wiped her mouth, kept moving. Got the weak patient to the stairwell, passed him through to waiting hands on the other side. 4 more followed. The door closed with a click softer than a heartbeat. 13 evacuated, 11 remaining. She crawled back through the darkness, muscle memory from Kandahar guiding her movement. Stay low, stay silent, present no profile, offer no target. The training had carved channels in her brain deeper than conscious thought. Automatic responses that required no decision-making because the decisions had been made thousands of repetitions ago. Beckett still lay curled where Holt's men had thrown him, small body shaking with suppressed sobs. 8 years old, bald from chemotherapy, skin translucent in the emergency lighting, utterly fragile in a situation that would traumatize adults. Reese reached him, placed a hand on his thin shoulder. The boy's eyes opened, found hers in the dimness. Recognition sparked. "Ghost lady." She put a finger to her lips. Beckett nodded, understanding somehow. This child who'd faced death through disease, now facing it through violence, and meeting both with a courage that made her chest ache. Natalia Kane lay 5 feet away, hands flex-cuffed behind her back, shoulder wound bleeding fresh through bandages that had soaked through. Her gray eyes tracked Reese's movement, calculating, assessing. When their gazes met, something passed between them, not words, understanding. Reese couldn't take Natalia yet. The equation wouldn't balance, but she could prepare for the moment when extraction became possible. She shifted closer, voice barely audible even at 6 inches. "When I come back for you, be ready to move. Your brother's here. Trust the plan." Natalia's eyes narrowed. "What plan?" "The one that gets everyone out alive except the people who deserve to die." A sound reached them from the western corridor. Footsteps, rapid, someone running. One of Holt's riflemen appeared, breathing hard, weapon raised but not aimed at anything specific. "Boss, we got a problem." The man's voice carried barely controlled panic. "Jenkins and Martinez aren't responding. Radio's dead. I can't find them anywhere." Holt turned, flashlight beam catching his subordinate's face. "Define can't find. I mean, they're gone." Last position was stairwell B for Martinez, elevator corridor for Jenkins. Both positions empty. No blood, no bodies, no sign of struggle, just gone. The silence that followed held weight. Holt processed the information with visible calculation, professional mind running through scenarios and probabilities. His team was being systematically eliminated. Someone was hunting his hunters, doing it quietly enough that he hadn't noticed until half his force had vanished. "Check the hostages." Holt's voice hardened. "Count them. Now." The rifleman moved his flashlight across the cluster of people on the floor, started counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He paused, counted again. The beam swept more frantically, illuminating faces, checking corners, searching for the missing. "Boss, we're down 13 hostages. They're gone." Holt's expression transformed, the professional calm fractured, revealing something uglier beneath. He kicked the nearest patient, an elderly man, who cried out in pain and terror. "Where did they go?" Holt grabbed the man by his hospital gown, hauled him half upright. "Where?" The old man couldn't answer, just sobbed and shook, unable to form words through fear and confusion. Holt threw him back down, drew his Sig Sauer, fired a round into the ceiling. The blast in the confined space hit like a physical assault, plaster raining down, ears ringing. "Whoever helped them escape, you've got 5 seconds to identify yourself, or I start executing hostages." 1, 2, 3. Reese stayed frozen, face pressed to the floor, controlling her breathing. Revealing herself accomplished nothing except removing her from play. Better to let Holt rage, let his anger make him sloppy. Wait for the opening that panic always created. 4, 5. Holt grabbed the nearest hostage, a young woman whose leg was still in a cast from reconstructive surgery. Put the gun to her temple. "Last chance. Tell me who's doing this or she dies." Nobody moved. The woman whimpered, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for death that would come because silence had become survival for everyone who knew the truth. Holt's finger tightened on the trigger. A voice cut through the darkness from somewhere near stairwell A. Male, controlled, carrying the kind of authority that came from leading men in situations where hesitation meant casualties. "Let her go, Holt. This is between you and me." Donovan Kane stepped into the corridor, hands raised, rifle left behind somewhere in the darkness. He moved with controlled precision, showing no weapons, presenting himself as the prize Holt had demanded. Behind him, nothing but empty corridor and the faint glow of emergency lighting. Holt swung his weapon toward Kane, keeping it pressed against the hostage's head, but his attention fully redirected. The legendary Donovan Kane finally decides to show himself. Kane stopped 20 feet away, hands still visible, posture suggesting surrender, but his eyes scanning the tactical situation with professional assessment. Your partner, Dwight Morrison, was selling military weapons to domestic terrorists. AR-15s, fragmentation grenades, C4 explosive. He was putting American lives at risk for profit. What happened in Tacoma was justice, not murder. Justice? Holt's laugh came out sharp, broken glass wrapped in sound. You executed a decorated combat veteran in a parking garage. Shot him twice in the head while he was unarmed. That's murder, Kane. That's what you are. A murderer. Your partner was a criminal. Kane's voice stayed level. You want revenge? Take it. But let these people go. They have nothing to do with what's between us. Oh, they have everything to do with it. Holt released the young woman, shoved her back toward the other hostages. They're the audience. They're going to watch you beg. Watch your sister die. Watch you realize what it feels like to lose someone you love while being completely powerless to stop it. He gestured to his remaining riflemen. Put him on his knees. The rifleman moved behind Kane, weapon raised, pressing the barrel against Kane's spine. "Kneel. Both knees. Now." Kane hesitated, jaw clenched, every line of his body resisting the command. In his world, in the hierarchy he'd built through competence and controlled violence, submission didn't exist. Bending knee to an enemy meant acknowledging their power, validating their authority over him. "Kneel, or I kill 3 hostages before your sister." Holt aimed at the elderly man he'd kicked earlier, starting with him. Kane lowered himself slowly, first one knee, then the other. His hands stayed raised, fingers spread, showing no threat. But his eyes never left Holt's face, and the promise in that gray stare said this surrender was temporary, tactical, buying time for something else to develop. For the first time in 36 years, Donovan Kane knelt before an enemy. The cost showed in the rigid set of his shoulders, the tight control of his breathing, the way his hands formed fists before forcing themselves open again. Natalia's voice cut through the moment, rough with pain and fury. "Donovan, don't do this for me." Kane's response came quiet, almost gentle. "Not letting you die, Nat. Not negotiable." Holt circled behind Kane, put the Sig Sauer against the base of his skull. Touching. Real family moment here. But here's the thing about family, Kane. Sometimes love makes you weak, makes you vulnerable, makes you kneel when you should fight. He pressed the barrel harder, forcing Kane's head forward. "I'm going to kill your sister first, make you watch her bleed out. Then I'll put one in your spine. You won't die, but you'll never walk again. You'll spend the rest of your life in a chair, remembering this moment, knowing you failed her." Reese had been crawling during Holt's speech, using his distraction to move through the shadows toward the medical oxygen storage. She'd seen the setup during her earlier reconnaissance, noted the configuration, understood the potential. The room held 6 large tanks of compressed oxygen, enough to supply the entire floor during emergencies. The safety systems included automatic shutoff valves designed to prevent exactly what she was about to attempt. She reached the storage room door, slipped inside, found the main valve in darkness by touch alone, her hands remembering the shape and position from countless equipment checks during normal shifts. Twisted it counterclockwise, heard the hiss of oxygen beginning to leak into the confined space. The gas was odorless, invisible, but Reese could feel it in the air, that particular quality of atmosphere changing as O2 concentration climbed. Too much, too fast, and the room would become an explosive hazard. The trick was controlled release, enough to feed what came next, but not enough to create an instantaneous fireball. She pulled the lighter from her pocket, the cheap plastic disposable she'd taken from the unconscious rifleman in the corridor, grabbed a handful of paper towels from the dispenser, twisted them into a loose bundle, held the flame to the edge. The paper caught slowly, orange flame spreading through the fibers. Reese set it in the metal trash bin, positioned 4 meters from the nearest oxygen tank, far enough to avoid immediate detonation, close enough that fire plus leaking oxygen would trigger the smoke detection system. She had maybe 30 seconds before the alarm started, longer before the fire reached critical mass. Reese moved back to the doorway, watched the flames grow, calculated spread rate and combustion acceleration. This was going to be loud, going to be chaotic, going to transform the tactical situation from Holt's controlled execution into something none of them could predict. The fire alarm began its electronic shriek. Red strobes flashed in the corridor, sprinkler heads activated throughout the floor, water cascading from ceiling-mounted nozzles in artificial rain that soaked everything within seconds. Holt jerked his head toward the alarm, weapon momentarily shifting away from Kane's skull. His professional training warred with natural instinct, the part of him that knew fire in a hospital represented catastrophic risk, fighting against tactical discipline that said, maintain control of the hostage situation. Kane moved. Not toward Holt, that would have been suicide at contact distance with a weapon already drawn. He threw himself sideways, rolled, put distance between himself and the gun barrel. His hand came up fast, palm strike aimed at Holt's wrist, designed to knock the weapon offline. The Sig Sauer fired. Not at Kane, he'd moved too quickly. The round went high, punched into the ceiling, added another blast to the chaos of alarms and sprinklers. Holt recovered faster than most men could have, weapon tracking Kane's roll, finger tightening for a second shot that would end this. But the sprinkler water had turned the floor slick, and his boot slipped fractionally, threw his aim offline. Kane's second strike connected with Holt's gun hand, drove it upward. The Sig Sauer flew from loosened fingers, skidded across wet tile, disappeared into shadows beyond the emergency lighting's reach. Two men collided, 36 and 45, both combat veterans, both trained at the highest levels, both carrying damage from wars that never quite ended. They fought with brutal efficiency, no wasted movement, no dramatic flourishes. This was violence stripped to its functional core. Strikes meant to disable, holds meant to control. Everything executed with the cold precision of men who'd learned killing as a profession. Holt was bigger, 6'4" to Kane's 6'1", heavier by 30 pounds of muscle built through decades of military PT. He drove a knee toward Kane's midsection, followed with an elbow aimed at the temple, combination designed to end fights fast. Kane blocked the knee, absorbed the elbow on his raised forearm, countered with a throat strike that Holt barely deflected. They broke apart, circled in the ankle-deep water spreading from the sprinklers, both breathing hard, both bleeding from impacts Reese hadn't seen land. The rifleman who'd forced Kane to kneel raised his weapon, trying to get a clear shot. The angle was wrong, Kane and Holt moving too fast, too close together. Firing risked hitting his own commander. Reese saw the hesitation, the moment of tactical indecision. She'd retrieved the Glock from where she'd tucked it against her spine, brought it up in a two-handed grip, sighted on the rifleman's center mass. The training came back like it had never left. Breath control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze, not pull. The Glock bucked once, suppressed but still loud enough to carry through the alarm noise. The rifleman dropped, round punching through his chest, just left of the sternum, hydrostatic shock stopping his heart before he understood what had happened. He was dead before he finished falling. Holt saw it, saw his last team member go down, saw the nurse who'd been cowering with the hostages now standing with a weapon and the stance of someone who'd put thousands of rounds through qualification courses. His eyes widened fractionally, recognition and recalculation happening simultaneously. His attention split between Kane and this new threat, tactical situation deteriorating faster than he could compensate. "You're not..." Reese didn't let him finish. She sprinted toward Natalia, dropped beside her, used a scalpel from her pocket to slice through the flex cuffs, hauled the injured woman upright despite the fresh blood spreading from her shoulder wound. "Stairwell C, behind the oxygen storage. Go, now!" Natalia stumbled, caught herself, looked back at her brother locked in combat with Holt. "I'm not leaving him." Reese shoved her toward the storage area, voice carrying command authority that left no room for argument. "You're leverage while you're here. You're free the moment you're gone. Move, or his sacrifice means nothing." Natalia ran, limping, one hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder, disappearing into the storage area and the hidden stairwell beyond. Marco Benedetti, still on the floor, with hands cuffed behind his back, caught Reese's attention. "Little help here, Sergeant." She crossed to him, cut his restraints, helped him to his feet despite his shoulder wound. "You're with me, we're getting the rest of them out." Marco nodded, understanding immediately, falling into the kind of wordless cooperation that came from shared military background and current crisis. They moved through the remaining hostages, cutting flex cuffs, pulling people upright, directing them toward the storage area in a stream of bodies that Holt couldn't stop because he was too busy trying to kill Kane. The fight had intensified. Both men were down to raw physicality now, grappling on the wet floor, striking with elbows and knees, trying to find holds that would let them finish this. Blood mixed with water, spreading in pink dilution across white tile. Holt got Kane in a chokehold, bicep compressing the carotid artery, cutting blood flow to the brain. Kane had maybe 8 seconds before unconsciousness, 30 before brain damage, 90 before death. His face purpled, veins standing out in his neck, hands clawing at Holt's arm without finding purchase on wet skin. Reese grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall mount. 20 pounds of steel and chemical suppressant, designed to fight fires but equally effective as a blunt instrument. She closed the distance in 4 strides, swung it like a baseball bat, connected with the back of Holt's skull. The impact made a sound like a sledgehammer hitting concrete. Holt's grip loosened, his eyes losing focus, body going momentarily slack from the concussion force. Kane didn't waste the opening. He drove an uppercut into Holt's jaw, teeth cracking, followed with a hook to the temple, another to the orbital bone. The strikes came in rapid succession, each one delivered with the full weight of Kane's body behind it, each one designed to inflict maximum damage. Holt tried to fight back, got his hands up, blocked 2 strikes, but the fire extinguisher had stolen his equilibrium. His blocks came slow, uncoordinated, leaving openings that Kane exploited with mechanical precision. A cross to the nose, a knee to the floating ribs, another hook to the already shattered orbital. Holt collapsed backward, hitting the wet floor hard, blood streaming from his face, consciousness flickering. Kane followed him down, mounted his chest, continued the assault. His fists rose and fell with metronomic rhythm, no rage visible, just cold execution of a task that needed completion. The fire in the oxygen storage had spread. What began as controlled burn had found the leaked oxygen, accelerated beyond Reese's calculations. Flames crawled across the ceiling, fed by the enriched atmosphere, consuming acoustic tiles and electrical conduit. She could feel the heat building, see smoke beginning to layer despite the sprinklers. The temperature differential meant the oxygen tanks were warming, pressure building inside steel containers designed to handle it, but not indefinitely. "We need to move." Reese grabbed Kane's shoulder, pulled him back from the systematic destruction of Holt's face. "Now! This whole floor is about to go up." Kane looked at her, his eyes taking a moment to refocus, to transition from combat mode to threat assessment. He saw the flames, understood the implications, pushed himself off Holt's chest. "The last hostages. Where?" "Already out, stairwell C. Your sister's safe. Marco's guiding them to the 3rd floor." Kane nodded, stood, swayed slightly. Blood ran from a cut above his left eye. His nose sat crooked from a break. His knuckles had split open from repeated impacts. But he was mobile, functional, combat effective despite the damage. Holt lay on the floor, face unrecognizable, breathing wet and ragged through a shattered nose and broken teeth. Alive, but neutralized, no longer a threat. The oxygen storage erupted. Not a massive explosion, the tanks hadn't ruptured, but the fire reached critical mass. Flames blew the storage room door off its hinges, sent it spinning through the corridor, trailing smoke and chemical residue. The pressure wave hit like a physical force, knocked both Kane and Reese backward, shattered windows along the western wall. Glass rained down. Ceiling tiles collapsed in sections. Fire spread with terrible speed, feeding on oxygen-enriched air, consuming everything it touched. "Beckett!" Reese's mind locked on the 8-year-old, still somewhere on this floor, too weak to have evacuated with the others. She pushed herself upright, ignoring the ringing in her ears, the ache in her ribs from where she'd hit the floor. "The boy. Room 415. We have to—" Kane was already moving, heading toward the patient rooms despite flames blocking direct access. Reese followed, pulled her wet scrub top up over her mouth and nose, trying to filter smoke that grew thicker with each breath. Room 415's door hung open, broken from when Holt's team had forced entry hours ago. Inside, smoke layered the air in horizontal bands, thickest near the ceiling, thinner near the floor. The sprinklers had activated but couldn't keep pace with the fire's spread. "Beckett." Reese dropped to hands and knees, crawled toward the hospital bed. "Beckett, where are you?" A small sound reached her, crying, muffled, coming from under the bed frame. She found him curled in the tight space, hands over his head, body shaking. "Ghost lady." His voice came out broken, raw from smoke inhalation. "I'm scared. I'm so scared." Reese pulled him out, gathered him against her chest despite the pain in her ribs. His body weighed almost nothing, fragile as paper, trembling against her with terror that no 8-year-old should have to experience. "I've got you. You're safe now. We're getting out." Kane appeared in the doorway, face grim. "Corridors blocked. Fires cut off the route to all 3 stairwells. We're trapped. Reese looked at the window. 4th floor, 15 meters to the parking area below. Concrete surface, no grass, no cushioning. A fall from this height meant broken bones at best, death at worst. Unless there was another option. The drainage pipe. She moved to the window, looked out through the rain. An old metal drainage pipe ran down the exterior wall, installed decades ago before modern interior plumbing made it redundant. 3 feet from the window, rusted, probably not rated for human weight. But it was there. Can you climb? Kane studied the pipe, understanding her intention immediately. Used to. Reese shifted Beckett in her arms, felt how little he weighed, calculated the physics of descent with a child clinging to her. I can try. Kane moved to the window, broke out the remaining glass with his elbow. Cold rain and wind blasted through the opening, carrying fresh air that pushed back the smoke temporarily. Give me the boy. I'll lower him to you once you're on the pipe. Reese looked at the distance, the wet metal, the concrete below. Every calculation said this was suicide. But staying meant burning to death, and that math was even simpler. She climbed onto the windowsill, rain immediately soaking her already wet clothes, wind trying to push her back inside. The pipe hung just beyond reach, requiring a small jump from an unstable perch 4 stories above ground. Behind them, flames consumed the corridor. The heat intensified, smoke forcing its way into the room despite the broken window. Time had run out. Reese jumped. Her right hand caught the pipe, fingers wrapping around cold metal, gripping with desperate strength. Her left arm swung free, body weight jerking her downward, shoulder joints screaming. The pipe held, bolts securing it to the brick facade, somehow maintaining integrity despite rust and age. She got her left hand on the pipe, began the descent. The metal was slick with rain, her palms finding no purchase, body sliding faster than she could control. She tried to slow the descent, squeezed harder, felt skin tearing, blood mixing with rainwater. Kane leaned out the window above, Beckett held securely. Ready? Reese braced herself, locked her legs around the pipe. Ready. Kane extended the boy downward, arms at full stretch, lowering him as far as possible. Beckett reached, small hands searching for Reese's shoulders. She grabbed him, pulled him against her chest with her left arm, right hand maintaining grip on the pipe. Hold on tight. Don't let go no matter what happens. Beckett's arms locked around her neck, thin legs wrapped around her waist. She continued the descent, sliding more than climbing, right hand burning, left arm screaming from supporting the boy's weight. They'd made it maybe 3 meters when she heard the sound. Metal groaning, bolts pulling free from deteriorating mortar. The pipe shifted, moving away from the wall, bending under weight it was never designed to carry. Reese looked down, 12 meters of empty air between her and the concrete parking area. A fire truck had arrived, ladder extended, but it was positioned for the 3rd floor windows, a full story below where she hung. Firefighters shouted something, voices lost in the wind and rain. The pipe gave another centimeter, bolts screaming. Beckett, listen to me. Reese shifted her grip, prepared for what came next. I'm going to throw you to the firefighters. You have to let go of me and reach for them. Can you do that? His grip tightened. I don't want to leave you. The pipe shifted again, more bolts failing, maybe 10 seconds before complete separation. Do you trust me? Beckett's small voice barely carried over the storm. You're the ghost lady. You saved me before. Then trust me one more time. Close your eyes, count to 3, then reach out. The boy shut his eyes. His voice came out steady despite the fear, despite everything. 1, 2, 3. Reese threw him. His body arced through the rain, small and fragile, spinning slightly. The firefighter in the ladder basket lunged, arms extended, catching Beckett against his chest. Safe, secure. The recoil from the throw pushed Reese backward, away from the pipe. Her bloody hand slipped, couldn't maintain purchase on the wet metal. She fell. 12 meters. Nothing to grab. only air and rain and gravity that didn't care about ranger training or combat experience or any of the things she'd survived. Time stretched. She saw the concrete rushing up, calculated impact force and probable injuries, knew she wouldn't survive this. But Beckett was safe. 24 hostages evacuated, Natalia Kane alive. Sometimes the mission succeeded even when the operator didn't. Her wrist stopped moving. Pain exploded through her shoulder, a bolt of agony so intense it whited out vision. She hung suspended, arm extended upward, looking at the hand that gripped her wrist with enough force to prevent the fall. Donovan Kane leaned from a third-floor window, one hand braced on the frame, the other locked around her wrist. His shoulder wound had reopened, fresh blood spreading through his shirt, his face twisted with effort. "Not on my watch, Ranger." He pulled. One-armed, injured, drawing on reserves that shouldn't have existed. Reese scrabbled for purchase on the brick facade with her feet, helping where she could, but the wall was smooth, offering nothing. Kane's muscles corded, tendons standing out in his neck. He hauled her upward inch by impossible inch, until she could reach the windowsill with her free hand. She pulled herself through, both of them collapsing on the third-floor corridor in a tangle of limbs and exhaustion. Water from the sprinklers pooled beneath them. The fire raged above, smoke beginning to filter down through ventilation systems. But they were alive, breathing, horizontal but functional. Kane's voice came out rough, abraded. "Everyone out?" "Everyone." Reese pushed herself to sitting, assessed her injuries. Shredded palms, dislocated shoulder, 3 ribs that felt broken or badly bruised. All survivable, all better than the alternative. "Your sister?" "Safe on the ground with Marco and the hostages." Kane nodded, closed his eyes briefly. When they opened again, something had shifted in them. Not softness, nothing that simple, but recognition of debt, acknowledgement of shared experience. You threw yourself into a burning building for a child you barely knew. Reese looked at her bloody hands. That's the job. Protect those who can't protect themselves. That hasn't been your job for 5 years. The words landed with weight. Reese met his gaze, held it. Maybe it never stopped being my job. Maybe I just forgot for a while. Footsteps approached from the stairwell. Tactical response teams, heavily armed, calling for survivors. The cavalry had finally arrived, late but present, ready to secure a situation that had already resolved itself through other means. Kane pushed himself upright, offered Reese his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet despite the screaming protest from her shoulder. They stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd walked into hell for different reasons and walked out together, covered in blood and smoke and the residue of violence that would never quite wash clean. The tactical teams swept through, calling clear on rooms, searching for remaining threats. Found Holt in the 4th-floor corridor, unconscious and cuffed by firefighters who'd reached him first. Found the 2 dead riflemen. Found the devastation and the evidence of what had happened here. Reese and Kane were separated, each given to paramedics who began immediate treatment. Reese watched Kane across the corridor as EMTs worked on his shoulder, saw him looking back, that gray stare holding steady. No words passed between them, none were needed. Outside, sirens and lights painted the Seattle night in emergency colors. Ambulances lined up to receive patients, media vans jockeyed for position. The hospital administration scrambled to manage a crisis that had somehow resulted in 0 civilian casualties, despite every indication it should have ended in massacre. Reese lay on a gurney, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance, listening to the paramedic detail her injuries over the radio. The pain had started to penetrate the adrenaline, a steady throb that promised worse to come once the shock wore off completely. But underneath the pain, underneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. A feeling she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something simpler and more fundamental. Purpose. The ghost had stopped hiding. And maybe, just maybe, that was how it should have been all along. 3 days passed in white rooms where machines monitored heartbeats and nurses moved through predictable rotations. Reese woke on the 4th morning in a private ICU room at Seattle Presbyterian, 15 miles from Cascade General because her own hospital had sustained too much damage to treat the casualties it had created. The injuries mapped themselves across her body in precise detail. Right hand wrapped wrist to mid-forearm, palm reconstructed through microsurgery after the drainage pipe had shredded tissue down to tendon. Left shoulder reduced and immobilized after the dislocation. Rotator cuff strained but intact. 3 fractured ribs bound tight. Each breath a reminder of the fire extinguisher's recoil and the impact when Kane had pulled her through the window. Second-degree burns scattered across her forearms, relatively minor, healing under specialized dressings. A chair sat beside her bed, the vinyl worn smooth from extended occupation. Donovan Kane occupied it now, same as he had for 72 hours according to the day shift nurse who'd mentioned it during morning rounds. He'd left only for his own medical treatments, returning each time to resume the vigil. His left arm was professionally bandaged, shoulder wound from Marco's distraction play requiring surgical debridement and antibiotic therapy. His face showed the damage from Holt's strikes. Orbital bone fractured but not shattered, nose reset and splinted, lips split and swollen. He moved carefully, favoring broken ribs that mirrored her own. "You should be resting." Reese's voice came out rough, abraded from smoke inhalation that had scorched her throat and bronchial passages. Kane looked up from the tablet he'd been studying. "Been resting. Sitting's close enough." "For 3 days?" "Seemed important. Making sure you woke up." The statement landed without drama, simple fact delivered in the flat tone of someone who didn't waste words on things that didn't require them. Reese studied his face, saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders. "Your sister?" "Discharged yesterday. Shoulders healing clean. Marco's with her at a secure location until I know whether Holt had partners who might want to continue his work." Kane set the tablet aside, leaned forward slightly despite the obvious discomfort it caused. "I looked into you, deeper than the basic background. Found your service record, deployment history, medical evaluations from after Kandahar." Reese's jaw tightened. "You had no right." "I had every right. You saved 24 lives, including my sister's. That creates obligation. When I owe someone, I understand exactly who they are and what they need." He pulled a folder from the bag beside the chair, opened it, began reading with clinical precision. "Sergeant Reese Gallagher, Army Rangers, 75th Regiment, combat medic, 3 rotations Afghanistan, primarily Kandahar province, decorated twice for valor, offered promotion to warrant officer, declined. March 2019, convoy ambush, 12 personnel, 1 survivor. You spent 16 hours trapped under casualties while hostiles searched for survivors. Extracted with severe dehydration, shock, psychological trauma classified as acute stress response." The words pulled her back to the overturned vehicle, the weight of bodies, the smell of diesel and blood, the sound of boots walking past her hiding place. Martinez's face, eyes open and unseeing, blood cooling on her skin. "Stop." The word came out harder than intended. Kane didn't stop. Medical discharge, honorable, full benefits. PTSD diagnosis, recommended for ongoing treatment. You declined after 3 sessions. Disappeared into civilian work. Changed hospitals twice in 2 years, both times after altercations with supervisors who questioned your judgment during emergencies. He closed the folder, met her eyes directly. "You've been running. From what you were, what you can do, what you survived. Pretending you're someone smaller, weaker, less capable. But Tuesday night proved something. The question now is what you do with that proof." Reese looked at her bandaged hands, the evidence of what happened when pretending stopped working. "What do you want, Kane?" "I want to offer you something. Not charity, opportunity." He pulled out a business card, set it on the bedside table. Heavy stock, simple design. Kane Security Solutions, Bellevue, Washington. A phone number, nothing else. "I run a firm that helps military veterans transition to civilian protective work. Security consulting, crisis response, tactical medical training for high-risk environments." We work with corporations, private citizens, government contractors. Legal, legitimate, but operating in spaces where standard security isn't enough. Reese picked up the card, felt the weight of it. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice, to keep running or to find work that uses what you know. People like us, we don't fit standard molds. We tried to make ourselves fit, but the edges cut wrong. Better to find spaces designed for sharp edges. The offer sat between them, loaded with implications. A return to the world she'd tried to leave. Not combat, not war, but adjacent enough that the distance might not matter. Using abilities she'd worked to suppress, becoming visible again in ways that invited scrutiny. But also direction, objective, the thing she'd been missing for 5 years while she counted pills and changed dressings and told herself satisfaction would eventually arrive if she waited long enough. I need time to think. Kane stood, movements controlled despite obvious pain. Take all the time you need. Card has my direct line. When you're ready, call. He reached the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Your brother Weston. The gambling debt. It's been handled. The collection agency doesn't exist anymore, and Weston's enrolled in residential treatment in Montana. 12 months, fully covered. He'll come out clean, or not at all, but at least he'll have the chance. Reese's throat tightened. I didn't ask you to. You saved my sister's life. You threw yourself into fire for a child you barely knew. You put a round through a hostel's chest at 20 feet in near darkness. That's not someone who gets left carrying debt that isn't hers. Kane's gray eyes held steady on her face. Warriors take care of their own. You proved what you are Tuesday night, whether you've been admitting it or not. The debt's paid because that's what we do. He left before she could respond, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt more final than any dramatic exit. Reese lay in the hospital bed, staring at the business card, feeling the weight of choices that would determine who she became next. The performance could continue, return to Cascade General once it reopened, resume the careful construction of being less than she was, safe, invisible, small. Or the performance could end. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened to reveal Beckett, walking slowly, holding his mother's hand. The 8-year-old looked better than he had in the corridor, color returning to his translucent skin, though the baldness from chemotherapy remained stark evidence of his ongoing battle. His mother, a woman in her 30s with Beckett's same gray-blue eyes, stopped at the threshold. I'm sorry to intrude. Beckett asked to see you. He's been asking every day. Reese pushed herself more upright despite her ribs' protest. It's fine. Come in. Beckett approached the bed with careful steps, his mother hovering protectively. When he reached the bedside, he pulled something from his pocket. A drawing, done in crayon on printer paper, carefully folded to preserve it. He unfolded it, showed her. A figure in armor, wings spread, holding a small child. The armor was covered in medical crosses. The wings were tattered but still functional. Above it, written in a child's careful printing, Ghost Lady Angel. I made this for you, because you're not sad anymore. You're not a ghost. You're an angel who wears armor. Reese took the drawing with her unbandaged left hand, studied the image, saw herself reflected through a child's understanding, transformed from haunted spirit to protective force. The interpretation carried weight she hadn't expected. Thank you, Beckett. I'll keep this. The boy's smile illuminated his whole face. Mom says my cancer is getting smaller. The doctors say I might get to go home soon. I told them it's because the ghost angel saved me. His mother's voice carried quiet intensity. You risked your life for my son. I don't have words adequate to thank you for that. Reese looked at Beckett, thought about the moment on the drainage pipe, the decision to throw him to safety, knowing it would likely cost everything. No calculation had been involved, no weighing of consequences, just certainty that this child deserved to live, and if her dying ensured that, the equation balanced. He's worth saving. They all were. The visit lasted another 10 minutes. Beckett describing his treatment plan and recovery timeline with the optimism of children who hadn't yet learned that sometimes fighting wasn't enough. When they left, Reese carefully folded the drawing, placed it beside Kane's business card. 2 paths, 2 versions of who she could become. The next visitor arrived 2 hours later. Ashley, the young nurse from Cascade General, carrying flowers and wearing civilian clothes instead of scrubs. She set the bouquet on the window ledge, fidgeted with her purse strap. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, the things I said. I didn't know." "You didn't know because I made sure you wouldn't." Reese kept her voice neutral. "I was hiding. You saw what I showed you." Ashley sat in the chair Kane had vacated. "But you saved us anyway, even though we were awful to you. Derek and I, we talked about it, how you risked everything for people who'd been nothing but kind. That's the standard. Protecting people, even difficult ones. That's what separates soldiers from murderers." The younger woman absorbed this, processing. "Dr. Hayes came by Cascade yesterday. The 4th floor is destroyed, but they're rebuilding. He asked if you'd be coming back when it reopens. He said he'd be honored to work with you again." Reese almost smiled. Hayes respects competence. Took extreme circumstances for him to see it. "Will you come back?" The question hung there, weighted with assumptions about who Reese was and what she wanted. Ashley expected affirmation, expected the hero nurse to return to her station, to continue healing in institutional hallways. But Reese looked at Kane's business card, thought about the offer, about 5 years spent in clothes that never quite fit. "I don't know yet. Still deciding." Ashley left with promises to visit again, to stay in touch, transforming from dismissive colleague to something approaching friend through shared trauma. The gesture felt genuine, even if the foundation was uncertain. 4 more days in the hospital, during which Kane visited twice, never pushing, just maintaining presence. Natalia came once, shoulder healing well, bringing gratitude that felt real rather than obligatory. Marco appeared to discuss tactical details of the 4th floor engagement, analyzing decisions with professional detachment. The media attention was relentless, reporters wanting interviews, human interest stories about the hero nurse who saved 24 lives. Reese declined them all, maintained privacy through hospital security and terse official statements. Fame held no appeal. Recognition meant visibility, and visibility meant questions about Afghanistan, about why she'd left service, about gaps in her civilian employment history. Better to let the story fade, let public attention move elsewhere. Discharge came on a gray Monday morning, November rain drumming against windows in familiar Pacific Northwest rhythm. Reese, dressed in clothes Natalia had brought, walked out of Seattle Presbyterian under her own power despite medical recommendations for another 2 days of observation. A black sedan waited at patient pickup, Marco behind the wheel, Kane in the passenger seat. Neither seemed surprised when Reese opened the rear door and slid inside. Kane handed her a manila envelope without preamble. "Your options. No pressure, just information." Inside, 3 program descriptions for Kane's security solutions: close protection training, crisis response medical instruction, security consultation development. Each one leveraged combat experience towards civilian application. Each one offered veterans a path that honored what they'd learned without requiring them to keep fighting wars. Reese read through the materials as Marco drove north through Seattle traffic toward Bellevue. The work called to something in her training. Knowledge that medical expertise combined with tactical awareness created force multipliers in crisis situations. What about the others? The ones struggling like I was? That's the point. Kane's response came without turning around. Everyone on staff has military background. Most fought the same battle you did, trying to fit into civilian life that doesn't have room for what we know. This gives them purpose without destroying what's left. The sedan pulled into the parking structure of a modern office building near downtown Bellevue. Kane Security Solutions occupied the 3rd floor, professional signage announcing services in crisis management and executive protection. Kane led her through the main area, introducing staff members whose backgrounds became obvious through bearing and vocabulary. Former military, most of them, transitioning from combat arms to protective services. They looked at Reese with recognition, seeing something in her posture that marked her as kindred. The conference room overlooked the Bellevue skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views across the city. Kane gestured to a chair, waited for Reese to sit before taking his own position. "I'm not going to pressure you. This works only if you choose it freely. But I will say this. Tuesday night, you stopped hiding. You used everything you are to save people who needed saving." That felt different than the past 5 years, didn't it? Reese thought about the drainage pipe, the fire, the moment when Sergeant Gallagher had returned with absolute clarity. About 16 hours under bodies in Afghanistan that taught her the difference between surviving and living. It felt like I was supposed to be there, like everything I'd learned finally had purpose beyond just keeping me alive. Kane nodded. That's what this is. Finding work that gives purpose to what you survived. Using hard-earned knowledge in service of objectives that justify the cost of carrying it. Reese looked at the folders, the office beyond the conference room glass, the city stretching toward mountains hidden by November clouds. Thought about Beckett's drawing of the armored angel. About Kane pulling her through the window when falling would have been easier. Some things can't be buried. They wait, and when circumstances require them, they return, whether you're ready or not. The question isn't whether to use what you know. It's whether you'll choose how to use it or let circumstances keep choosing for you. Kane extended his hand across the table. "So what's your choice, Sergeant Gallagher?" Reese stood, took his hand, felt the firmness of grip that sealed contracts between people who understood words were cheaper than actions. "I'm ready to stop pretending. Show me how this works." 6 months later, May sunshine broke through clouds that had dominated Seattle since October. Reese stood in front of a training class, 15 veterans arranged in semicircular seating, watching her demonstrate thoracic needle decompression on a trauma mannequin. Her hands moved with practiced precision, explaining entry points and landmarks, pressure differential, and tension pneumothorax identification. The students took notes, asked questions, engaged with material that bridged their military experience and civilian application. Reese taught the way she'd learned, direct and practical, stripping away unnecessary theory to expose functional core. Kane observed from the back of the room, present for final evaluations. When the session ended, students filed out, discussing concepts and comparing experiences. Genuine understanding rather than mere compliance. "You're good at this." Kane approached the training platform. Natural teacher, had good teachers. Learned from people who understood that training quality determines survival rates. The months had brought changes beyond professional transition. Physical therapy had restored full range of motion to her shoulder. The scars on her palms had faded to thin white lines. The nightmares about Kandahar had decreased in frequency, though not disappeared entirely, therapy helping her process what she'd carried for 7 years. Weston had completed treatment in Montana, emerged clean, and committed to maintaining sobriety. They spoke weekly now, relationships slowly rebuilding on more honest foundations. Cascade General had reopened its 4th floor 3 months ago, completely rebuilt. Dr. Hayes had sent a formal offer of employment, competitive salary, acknowledgement of her actions. Reese had declined politely, explaining her path had taken a different direction. A knock on the training room door interrupted equipment reset. Beckett stood in the hallway, taller than 6 months ago, hair growing back in dark stubble that promised full recovery. His mother waited behind him, smiling. "We were in the area." Beckett's voice had strengthened, losing the fragile quality. "Wanted to show you something." He pulled out a report card, all A's and B's, evidence of a mind that had survived chemotherapy with intellect intact. The doctors said he was in full remission, cancer undetectable, prognosis excellent. "I'm going to be a doctor." The announcement came with absolute certainty. "So I can save people like you saved me." Reese took the report card, studied it with appropriate gravity. "You'll make an excellent doctor. You already understand that sometimes the scariest moments teach us the most important things." After they left, Kane lingered while Reese finished organizing. "You ever regret it? Leaving nursing? Coming here instead?" Reese considered honestly. Nursing had mattered, still mattered. The work was essential, deserved more recognition. But it hadn't been her work. It had been a hiding place, safe and respectable and utterly insufficient. No regrets. This is where I belong. She looked at the training equipment, the curriculum materials, the veteran students who came through searching for purpose in civilian life that honored what they'd learned. Some people survive trauma and spend the rest of their lives running from it. Others survive and realize the cost has to mean something, that the weight you carry can become strength if you learn to bear it properly. Kane nodded, understanding implicit. We've got another contract starting next month. Humanitarian organization deploying medical teams to disaster zones. They need tactical medical training and security protocols. Interested? Reese smiled. When do we start? The work continued, mission after mission, each one leveraging abilities forged in Afghanistan and refined through necessity on a Seattle hospital floor. Reese taught classes, developed curriculum, deployed with teams that needed combat medic expertise in environments where traditional medical support couldn't reach. The warrior had found new battles worth fighting, and somewhere in the process of teaching others to transform trauma into purpose, Reese Gallagher had discovered what it meant to carry darkness without being consumed by it. Some wounds never fully heal. They scar over, become part of who you are, change how you move through the world. But scars can be armor if you wear them right. Can be evidence not just of what you survived, but of what you became because surviving alone was never the destination. The rain returned as evening fell, Seattle weather reasserting itself. Reese locked the training facility, walked to her car through the downpour, water streaming off her jacket. She didn't mind the rain anymore. Beckett had been right. Rain washed things clean, revealed what was underneath, made everything honest again. And sometimes, if you stopped running long enough, you discovered that the person you'd been trying to bury was exactly the person you needed to become. Not the ghost hiding in institutional hallways, not the soldier trapped in foreign deserts, but someone in between. Someone who'd learned that the hardest battles aren't always the ones where bullets fly. Sometimes they're the quiet wars fought in hospital corridors at 3 a.m. Sometimes they're the choice between hiding what you are and accepting what you've become. Reese had made her choice. The rest was just mission execution.